The beeping of the heart monitor had been going on for 4 days before it sank, and that nobody was coming back for me. I'm 67 years old. I spent 41 of those years as an electrician, the last 20 running my own shop out on the west side of Columbus, wiring half the strip malls and subdivisions that went up in Hilliard between 1990 and the day I sold the business. My hands have been burned, shocked, and broken more times than I can count, and I never once asked anybody to feel sorry for me. So understand that what I'm about to tell you isn't a man feeling sorry for himself. It's a man telling you exactly what happened, the way it happened, so that maybe you'll recognize it if it ever starts happening to you. It started with a heart attack at my own kitchen table. It was a Sunday. My daughter and her husband had come over for dinner, which they did maybe once a month. Usually when they wanted something, I'd made pot roast, the way my wife Ruth used to make it before she passed 4 winters ago, and I remember thinking the gravy had come out a little thin and being annoyed about it. That's the last clear thought I had before the elephant sat down on my chest. The room tilted. I went down off the chair and took the water glass with me, and the next thing I remember is the inside of an ambulance and a young paramedic with a buzz cut telling me to stay with him. What I found out later, from a neighbor and not from my own family, was what happened in those minutes on the kitchen floor. My son-in-law stood there filming it on his phone, not calling 911 first, filming. My daughter, my only child, the little girl I used to carry on my shoulders through the Ohio State Fair, looked down at me gasping on the linoleum and said to him, and I quote, because the neighbor heard it through the screen door, "God, here we go again. The old man and his drama. Here we go again." Like a heart attack was a thing I did to ruin her Sunday. They rode behind the ambulance in their leased BMW. By the time I was stable in the cardiac ICU at Maple Grove Medical Center, with 2 stents in and a fall fractured wrist and a splint, they'd already been to the cafeteria, eaten, and started talking about logistics. I know this because I was more awake than they thought. People assume an old man on a morphine drip is unconscious. I wasn't. I was just still. "We can't keep doing this," my daughter said, by the window, her arms crossed. "He shouldn't be living alone in that house anymore. It's too much." "The house is the thing," my son-in-law said. "He never could keep his eyes off $1. If we move him into one of those assisted places, the cheaper one out by the highway, the house just sits there appreciating. We sell it, that's what, $420? More if we wait? He'll fight it. So we don't ask. We get the power of attorney signed while he's loopy on the meds and grateful somebody's handling things. People sign anything in here." My daughter didn't argue. That's the part that I keep coming back to even now. She didn't say, "That's my father. We're not doing that." She just sighed, the tired sigh of a woman inconvenienced, and said, "I'm not driving back out here every day. He's a difficult old man, and he always has been. Let's just get it handled." A difficult old man. I kept my eyes shut and my breathing even, and I let them think I hadn't heard a word. They stayed maybe 90 minutes total. My son-in-law shook my hand on the way out, careful of the splint, and told me to take it easy, champ, and my daughter kissed the air somewhere near my forehead and said she'd check in. Then they were gone, and the door eased shut, and I lay there in the blue dark of that machine-filled room and did the math on my own life. 5 days I was in that hospital, ICU for the first 2, then a regular cardiac floor once they were sure my heart was going to keep its end of the bargain. 5 days, and after that first 90-minute visit, I did not see my daughter or my son-in-law again. Not once. No call that I'd answered to silence, no flowers, a single text on day 3 that read, "How you feeling? We're handling some stuff. We'll come when we can." They never came. You want to know what kept me company instead? A night nurse named Gloria Pratt. Gloria was maybe 50, built like she could carry a man twice her size, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and zero patience for nonsense. She'd been doing this for almost 30 years. The first night when I was sharp enough to talk, she sat on the edge of the chair while she changed my IV and said, "Your people coming back, because I've watched the door for you." And they haven't. "I heard them," I told her. "In the ICU. I heard what they're planning." She didn't say anything sweet or false. She just looked at me over those glasses and said, "Then I guess the question is, what you're planning?" And that, right there, was the moment something turned over in me. Because I'd spent 4 days drowning in hurt, and Gloria handed me a different thing to hold on to. Not grief. A plan. Here's what they didn't know about me. What my son-in-law in particular had never bothered to learn in 12 years of marriage to my daughter. I am not a poor man, and I am not a stupid one. When I sold my electrical business in 2014, I didn't just take the check and buy a boat. I rolled most of it into investments, quietly, the way my own father taught me. I kept the house paid off. I lived below my means. And over the years, when my son-in-law's career got going, I'd done something I'd never told either of them, the full shape of. My son-in-law works as a regional sales manager for a building supply and HVAC distribution company out of Dublin, Ohio, a place called Hargrove Industrial Supply. Good company, old company, family run by a man named Bill Hargrove, who's about my age, and built it from 1 warehouse to 9 across 3 states. Years back, when Hargrove was looking for private capital to expand and my son-in-law mentioned it at a Thanksgiving I'd rather forget, I'd reached out to Bill Hargrove myself, quietly, and put money in. A real position. I'd kept it discreet because I didn't want my son-in-law thinking his job was something his father-in-law had bought him. It wasn't. He got hired on his own, and I stayed in the background, a silent investor who got a statement once a quarter and otherwise kept his mouth shut. My son-in-law had no idea his wife's old man owned a meaningful piece of the company that signed his paychecks. Lying in that bed, listening to my own heart on a monitor, I started to understand exactly what I was going to do with that. The morning of my 4th day, I asked Gloria to bring me my phone and prop up the bed. I made 3 calls. The first was to my attorney, a sharp, unsentimental woman named Helen Voss, who'd handled my affairs since Ruth got sick. I told her everything. The kitchen floor, the filming, the ICU conversation, the power of attorney plan, the 5 days of silence. Helen listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I pay her for, and at the end she said, "First thing, before anything, do not sign a single document anyone puts in front of you, including from the hospital, that you don't send to me first. They cannot get a POA executed if you're of sound mind in refusing. Are you of sound mind?" "Sharper than I've been in a year," I said. "Then nobody is selling your house." "Good. Now, tell me about your position in Hargrove." The second call was to Bill Hargrove himself. I hadn't spoken to Bill in maybe 2 years, just the quarterly statements and a Christmas card. He picked up on the second ring, and when I told him where I was calling from and why, there was a long silence on the line. Then he said, "Your son-in-law, the regional out of the Dublin branch. Not a question. That's him. I'm going to be straight with you because you've been straight with me for 9 years, Bill said. We've had a fraud examination open on that branch for 2 months. Expense irregularities. I didn't connect the name to you. I would never have guessed." He paused. "How do you want to handle this?" "I want to come see you when I'm out of here," I said. "I want to increase my position, and I want to be in the room when you do what you're already going to do." The third call was to a man named Curtis, a private investigator Helen had used before, a retired detective from the Franklin County Sheriff's Office who did discreet work for attorneys. I gave him my daughter's address, my son-in-law's name, and a single instruction. Find out the truth, all of it, and don't spare my feelings. Then I gave the phone back to Gloria, and for the first time in 4 days I slept like a man with somewhere to be. I was discharged on a Thursday. My wrist was splinted, my chest ached when I breathed too deep, and I was under orders to take it easy for a month, which I had every intention of ignoring as needed. A car service took me back to my own house on a cul-de-sac in Hilliard, the brick ranch Ruth and I bought in 1988. With the oak in the front yard, I planted myself when it was no thicker than my thumb. Getting up the steps with a splinted wrist and a body that had recently quit on me was its own small humiliation. But I did it. I let myself into my own house. I sat in my own chair. and nobody in 5 days had so much as fed the cat. She came winding around my ankles, indignant and starving. And that, of all things, is what finally made my eyes sting. Not the betrayal. The cat. I fed her, and I told her I was sorry, and I told her things were going to be different now. Curtis's first report landed in my inbox 2 days later, and I read it at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee I wasn't supposed to be drinking. It was worse than I'd let myself imagine. My daughter and son-in-law were drowning. $72,000 in credit card debt across 6 cards. A mortgage they were 2 months behind on. 2 leased German cars they couldn't afford. My daughter had quit her job 18 months earlier to build her brand as some kind of online lifestyle person, which, as far as Curtis could tell, brought in a few $100s a month and cost them a great deal more in the things she bought to photograph. They were spending like people who knew a big check was coming. And it was. They thought it was. The big check was me. Curtis had found correspondence, he wouldn't say exactly how, between my son-in-law and a residential real estate agent. The emails were dated 3 weeks before my heart attack. Square footage, comps from my neighborhood, estimated timeline for listing the property pending power of attorney. They'd been measuring my house for sale while I was still healthy and hosting them for pot roast. The heart attack didn't start their plan. It just felt to them like a convenient acceleration. That was the page that turned my grief into something colder and more useful. But it was a second report, a week later, that broke the last soft thing left in me. Because Curtis hadn't just looked into the two of them as a unit. I'd told him to find all of it, and he did. My son-in-law was cheating on my daughter. Had been for over a year, with a woman named Kayla, who worked at a competing distributor. That alone I might have filed away as their problem. But it was worse than an affair. Curtis pulled records showing my son-in-law had quietly opened accounts my daughter didn't know about, was moving money out of their joint finances in small amounts, and, most damning of all, had been consulting a divorce attorney for the past 8 months. The timing in those notes was explicit and sickening. The plan, his plan, the one he hadn't shared with his wife, was to wait. Wait for the old man to die. Wait for my daughter to inherit the house, and whatever savings she imagined I had. Wait until that money cleared and got tangled into their marital assets. Then file for divorce and walk away with half of an inheritance that came from me, while leaving my daughter holding the debt. She thought they were a team waiting for a windfall. She was his mark as much as I was. He'd married a man's only child and was prepared to use that man's death to rob the daughter on his way out the door. I sat with that for a long time. I want to be honest about it, because the easy thing, the satisfying thing, would be to tell you I felt nothing for her. But she was still the girl on my shoulders at the fairgrounds. She'd made a cruel and selfish choice, and I was done bailing her out of the consequences of her choices forever. But she didn't deserve to be robbed blind by the man sleeping next to her, and she sure as hell didn't deserve to find out from a process server. I called Helen and told her to draw up everything. We met at my house, the two of us, at the dining table that had hosted 40 Thanksgivings, and we built it brick by brick over a long afternoon. A new will, and more importantly, a living trust. The kind that can't be contested by an angry relative with a lawyer and a grievance. Every asset accounted for, the house, the investments, the cash, and not $1 of it going to my daughter or her husband. The bulk of my estate, I directed, would go to a scholarship fund for kids going into the electrical and building trades through the community college and the apprenticeship program I came up in. A real fund with my and Ruth's names on it. Money that would put tools in the hands of 18-year-olds who'd actually earn them. "This is airtight," Helen said when we finished, capping her pen. "If they challenge it, they'll spend money they don't have on a fight they can't win. There's no crack in it." "Good." She looked at me for a second over the papers. "You sure you want to leave the daughter nothing? Truly nothing?" I'd thought about it for days. "I'm not going to be her bank from the grave," I said. She made it clear what I am to her. A house with a dollar figure on it. So she gets to find out what it's like when the house says no. I paused. "But put a line in it. A small thing. If she ever divorces that man and comes to me herself, Not for money, just to be my daughter again. The door isn't bolted. I won't write that into the trust. I'll just keep it in my own head. That part's between her and me. Helen nodded slowly. She'd known Ruth. She understood. The next piece moved faster than I expected. I met with Bill Hargrove on a Tuesday morning at his office in Dublin, a corner room overlooking the warehouses, and I came in with my wrist still splinted and my chest still sore, and a cashier's check that increased my stake in his company to a number that gave me real weight at the table. Bill walked me through the fraud examination his people had completed. It was thorough, and it was ugly. My son-in-law had charged the company $14,000 in personal expenses over 6 months, disguised as client development. Dinners at steakhouses where the only guest was Kayla, a regional sales retreat in Nashville that was a long weekend for 2 at a boutique hotel. A set of golf clubs, hotel spa charges, each one logged in the system with a little note, client relations, prospect dinner. A paper trail he built himself because he'd gotten arrogant and nobody was reading. On its own, Bill said, this is a termination for cause, and we be within our rights to refer it to the prosecutor. We've decided not to pursue charges, mostly because the paperwork and the press aren't worth it to me. But the man does not work here anymore after this week. That was true before I knew your connection to him. It's just truer now. He looked at me. You said you wanted to be in the room. I do. It's unusual. So was my situation. He almost smiled. We'll set it for Monday, 9 o'clock. He'll get a calendar invite that says quarterly performance review. He won't know who's going to be sitting there. There was one more thing I did, and I did it through Helen, and it gave me no pleasure, even though it was entirely just. Over the years, I'd loaned my daughter and son-in-law money. Real money, $94,000 all told, across maybe a dozen times. And every single time, because I'm my father's son and you do these things properly, I'd had them sign a promissory note, down payment help, car trouble, a business opportunity of my son-in-law's that evaporated. They never repaid a cent, and I'd never pushed. Because that's what fathers do, you tell yourself. You keep the peace. You don't make it weird. I told Helen to formally call the notes. All of them. Buy the book with 30 days' notice and a payment schedule, exactly as the documents allowed, not out of spite. Out of the radical idea that an adult who signs a paper promising to pay you back should, at some point, pay you back. Should, at some point, pay you back. Now there was nothing to do but wait for Monday, and let them feel it coming the way I'd felt that elephant sit down on my chest. It started Friday. Gloria texted me because we'd struck up the kind of friendship you do with the person who watched the door for you when your own blood wouldn't. My son-in-law had shown up at the hospital that afternoon to close out the billing and, I suspect, to start the paperwork machinery he thought I was too sedated to stop. He'd asked the desk when the old man was being discharged so they could get the house situation moving. He was informed I'd been discharged a week earlier and was doing fine. And then, Gloria told me, with what I could feel was deep satisfaction even through a text message. A billing supervisor who happened to be there mentioned, just in passing, that the account had a note about a Mr. Hargrove and an investor's office requesting records. He didn't understand it, but he understood enough to go pale. He left, she said, without finishing the paperwork he'd come to do. Saturday, Curtis reported, my son-in-law drove out to my house, sat in his BMW in front of my oak tree for 15 minutes, didn't ring the bell. I was inside the whole time working on an old mantel clock I'd been meaning to fix for 2 years, a 1940s Seth Thomas with a frozen movement. And I watched him through the front window the way you'd watch weather. I felt nothing I could name. Eventually he drove off. Sunday my daughter called me. First time in 12 days. I let it go to voicemail and listened to it twice. Her voice was high and strange. Dad, hi, it's me. I think there's been some kind of mix-up with the company and with some legal thing, and we really need to talk, so call me, okay? Call me. Not I'm sorry. Not are you alive. Just, there's been some kind of mix-up the way you'd call about a billing error. I didn't call her back. Not yet. there was a thing that had to happen first. Monday morning, I put on the gray suit I'd bought for Ruth's funeral, the only good suit I own, because some occasions ask you to dress for them. My wrist was out of the splint by then, healed enough, though it ached. Helen picked me up at 8:30 and we drove out to Dublin, mostly in silence, the way you ride before something you've been waiting a long time for. Bill Hargrove's assistant showed us into his office at 5 to 9. Bill stood, shook my hand, settled me into a leather chair angled toward the door. Helen sat beside me with her briefcase on her lap. We didn't say much. We didn't need to. At 9:08, my son-in-law came in. I have to tell you, the man looked like he hadn't slept since Friday. The Spencer suit was rumpled. His eyes were red-rimmed. He had the particular gray color of a man who knows the ground is gone but is still walking like there's a floor. He saw Bill and he started his salesman's smile, and then his eyes found me in the chair by the window, and the smile died on his face like a light switched off. "What?" he said. "What is this?" "Sit down," Bill said, not unkindly, just finally. And my son-in-law sat in the chair farthest from me, gripping the armrests the way you grip something on a plane that's dropping. Bill laid it out plain. The performance numbers, down sharply. The client complaints. And then, in a voice as level as a spirit level, the expense fraud. $14,000. He read a few of the line items aloud. The Nashville hotel, the steakhouse dinners for two, the golf clubs, and with each one my son-in-law got a shade grayer. Helen slid a manila folder across the desk toward him, copies of the receipts and the statements with his own signature on them, and he opened it with hands that were visibly shaking and looked down at the proof of his own arrogance. "This isn't, you don't understand the context," he started. "I understand the context," I said. It was the first time I'd spoken, and my voice came out steadier and colder than I'd planned. "The context is that you stole from a company you don't own, while you waited for me to die so you could steal from me too." His head came up. For 1 second there was the old contempt in his eyes. The "here we go," the difficult old man. "You did this," he said. "You bought your way in here just to—" "I've owned a piece of this company for 9 years," I said. "Longer than you've worked here. You just never bothered to ask the old man what he did with his money, because you never thought the old man mattered. I watched that land. I watched him understand that the ground had been gone the whole time, that he'd been standing on it out of habit." Bill let the silence sit a moment, then finished it cleanly. "Your employment with Hargrove Industrial Supply is terminated effective today, for cause. Your severance is the contractual minimum. We are not, as a courtesy, referring the fraud to the prosecutor. You'll surrender your laptop, your phone, and your badge to security on the way out." I'd call that a generous outcome. My son-in-law made a sound I'd never heard a grown man make. "I have a mortgage," he said. "I have $70,000 in debt. You can't just—" "You should have thought about the debt," I said, "before you stood over me on my kitchen floor and filmed it instead of calling for help." His mouth opened and shut. He hadn't known I knew about that. The neighbor's screen door. The thing he'd thought no one saw. "And before you have your lawyer draft a wrongful termination letter," Helen said, opening her briefcase again, "you should know that my client is also formally calling the promissory notes you and your wife signed. $94,000. The documents are valid. The debt is acknowledged in your own signatures, and the first payment is due in 30 days. She set the schedule on the desk in front of him, very gently, the way you'd set down something that might break. He didn't reach for it. He just stared at the wall. And then he did the thing I'll remember longest. He looked at me, and instead of contempt or rage, there was a kind of pleading panic, and he said, "What about your daughter? You do this to her? She's your kid." And I almost laughed because of all the people to invoke her. "You're worried about my daughter," I said. "That's rich, coming from a man who's been seeing a woman named Kayla for 14 months, who opened accounts your wife doesn't know about, who's had a divorce lawyer on retainer for 8 months, waiting for me to die so you could split an inheritance and leave her with the debt." I watched the blood drain out of his face all over again, a different fear this time. No, I'm not doing this to my daughter. You did this to my daughter. I'm just the one who turned the lights on. He didn't say anything after that. There wasn't anything to say. Security came, two quiet men, and he stood up on unsteady legs and left without another word, the manila folder still open on the desk where he dropped it. In the elevator going down, Helen let out a long breath and said, "In 30 years I've watched a lot of terminations. That was the most controlled one I've ever seen." "It didn't feel controlled," I said. "It just felt finished." The aftermath came in pieces, the way these things do. My daughter found out about Kayla that same week, not from me, but from the discovery process and from a phone bill and from the way a marriage comes apart once one corner of the lie is pulled loose. She showed up at my door on a Wednesday evening, and this time I let her in. She'd been crying. She looked 10 years older than the woman who'd called me a difficult old man over a hospital windowsill. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table, and she didn't ask for money, and she didn't make excuses, or not many. She said she was sorry. She said it over and over, and some of it was the sorry of a person who'd been caught, and some of it I think was real. She said she'd known things were wrong with her marriage, but she'd told herself they'd be fine once they got stable. And I understood with a sick clarity that the thing that was going to make them stable, in her mind, had been my death. I didn't yell at her. I was too tired and too far past it for that. I told her the truth instead. That I'd heard them in the ICU. That I knew about the realtor, the power of attorney. The plan to put me in a cheap facility and sell my house out from under me while I was alive. I watched her try to deny it and then watched her not be able to. I told her about the will and the trust, that there was nothing in it for her, that I wasn't going to be a bank she inherited. She cried harder at that, and I let her, and then she asked the only question that mattered. "So that's it? You're just done with me?" "No," I said. "But I'm done with a version of us where I pay and you take, and we both pretend that's love. If you want a father, you know where I live. The door's not locked, but you're going to have to come through it as my daughter, not as somebody waiting on my house." I slid a piece of paper across the table to her. The number for a divorce attorney Helen had recommended, a good one, who would make sure her soon-to-be ex-husband didn't get to keep the accounts he'd been hiding. "That's the only help I'm giving you," I said. "And it's worth more than the money." She took it. She's been calling once a week since. Not for anything. Just to talk. I don't know yet if it's real or if it'll last, and I've stopped needing to know in advance. Some things you just have to let run and see. My son-in-law, soon-to-be ex-son-in-law, hired a lawyer and threatened everything and accomplished nothing because there was nothing to accomplish. The termination was clean. The notes were valid. The divorce, last I heard, is going to cost him most of what he was hiding, which is a kind of poetry I didn't have to write myself. As for me, I'm fine. Better than fine, if I'm honest. My heart's behaving. I take my walks. I see Gloria for coffee once a month, and we laugh about the fact that the best friend I made all year is a night nurse who watched a door for a stranger. The scholarship fund is real now, real money with 2 kids already named for the fall apprentice class, and I drive out to the community college sometimes just to see the shop where they'll learn. The smell of solder and cut copper that's been the smell of my whole life. And I finished the clock. That old 1940 Seth Thomas with the frozen movement. It took me the better part of 3 weeks, cleaning 70 years of gummed oil out of a mechanism finer than anything you'd build today, freeing one tiny seized gear at a time. And one evening I wound it and held my breath, and it started to tick. Just like that, after all those years stopped, it turned out the thing wasn't broken. It was only clogged and waiting. And it needed somebody patient enough to take it apart and find out which pieces were worth saving. It sits on my mantel now, keeping good time. And most nights I sit in Ruth's chair and listen to it in the quiet, and I think about how the same is true of people, more or less. Some of them you can clean up and get running again. Some of them you can't, and the trick, the thing nobody tells you, is being honest with yourself about which is which, and not bleeding yourself dry trying to fix the ones that were never going to keep time again. I'm 67 years old. I thought I'd spend the end of my life being managed and sold off by the people I raised. Instead, I'm sitting in my own paid-for house listening to a clock I brought back from the dead, with a daughter who calls on Sundays and might, someday, mean it. I'll take that. After everything, I'll take that, and I'll call it justice, and I'll sleep just fine. For 4 winters, I told myself that keeping the peace was the same thing as keeping my family. And it took a heart attack on my own kitchen floor to show me they were never the same thing at all. I gave and gave because I thought that was love, and all I taught my daughter was that an old man's no didn't mean anything. Every unpaid note I waved off, every excuse I swallowed to avoid making things weird, became another brick in the road that ended with her standing over me at a hospital window, deciding which cheap facility to put me in. Cause and effect. I built that. I have to own my part before I let myself be angry at hers. What saved me wasn't rage. Rage would have had me yelling in that ICU and signing whatever they put in front of me out of spite or exhaustion. What saved me was staying still long enough to think, and then thinking clearly enough to act. I called Helen before I called anyone else, because being right doesn't protect you, being prepared does. I'd quietly kept my position in Bill Hargrove's company for 9 years, not out of cunning but out of the plain habit of doing things properly, and it turned out the boring discipline of a lifetime was the very thing that gave me ground to stand on when my own blood pulled the floor out. That's the part I'd tell anyone younger than me. The patient, unglamorous work you do when nobody's watching is what's there for you on the day everybody's watching. But knowing the right thing and being smart about it still aren't enough if you can't make yourself do the hard part. The hard part wasn't the lawyer or the trust. It was looking at the daughter I carried on my shoulders at the fairgrounds and deciding I would not be her bank from the grave, that I'd rather lose the easy version of us than keep paying for a lie we both pretended was affection. It took more out of me to say, "The door's open, but you come through it as my daughter, not as someone waiting on my house," than anything else I did. Drawing a line with someone you still love and holding it while they cry is the loneliest courage there is. I'm sitting in Ruth's chair as I write this, listening to a clock I spent 3 weeks bringing back from the dead, and I think the lesson is just that. Some things you clean out and they keep good time again. Some don't. The wisdom is being honest about which is which. The strength is acting on it once you know. And the decency is doing it without becoming cruel in the process. I didn't get my revenge. I got my life back, my paid-for house, my Sunday phone calls that might someday be real. If you're where I was, lying still while people decide your worth in square footage, hear me. Don't bleed yourself dry, proving your love to people who've already priced your house. Stand up while you still can.